What will you do when the machines take over? That was the subject matter of our third place speaker at this year's World Championship of Public Speaking. I love this speech. It was a topical speech. It's always nice to see a speech that comes out at these championships that aligns with the times. Often you can hear similar stories at these World Championships of Public Speaking. You hear about starting a family, traveling, pursuing a new career, achieving something, overcoming a challenge. To have a speech talking about AI, I thought was really cool. I love this speech. Just a little bit of commentary on the World Championships in general. Each of our top 3 places were women this year, which was exactly the same as what happened last year as well. And it's good to see that also we had women of colour represented as well. I think this is really important for diversity and representation in Toastmasters. So I was really pleased to see the final lineup. I enjoyed all 3 speeches in different ways, and that's what I'm going to look at in these analysis videos. A little bit of housekeeping first of all. What I'm not going to do in these videos is I'm not going to comment on the ranking of the speeches. Well, I think this speech should have finished here, or I think that speech shouldn't have finished here. The only people who make that decision are the judges on the day. And everyone else just has an opinion. And I don't think looking at the opinions is really helpful in terms of what we can learn from these speeches. So what I'm doing in these analyses is I'm focusing on what are the learning points, what can we take from these speeches. I'm commenting on this as a fellow competitor, as a speech nerd, and just looking at what can we learn from these speeches and what can we learn from these speakers who have all put so much hard work to get to this final stage. Not just the top 3, but all of the folks in the finals. And not just in the finals, but in the semi-finals as well. There's so much work that it takes to get up to this point, and what can we learn from the work of others. The second piece of housekeeping is I'm going to be using the footage provided by Toastmasters International, looking at Angeli's speech. I do not claim the rights to this footage. I do not own this footage. The footage is owned by Toastmasters International, and the use of this footage is for informational and educational purposes only. So with the spirit of information and education in mind, let's look at this third place speech by Angeli Raven Fitch.
Contest chair, fellow human beings, I've been replaced.
So in Toastmasters, we have this little bit of an etiquette thing where at the start of the speech, it's often traditional to say, Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, welcome guests. And this was kind of introduced in Toastmasters as a way for folks who didn't really know how to start their speech or didn't know how to begin that connection with the audience. This was given to them as a line that they could use to help them in that respect. And it's something that we see in a lot of speeches, even when you go right up to these world championships. But what folks often like to do is they like to play with this trope that we have. So instead of Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, welcome guests, what can you do with that that's going to create a little bit more of a link to your speech or some kind of joke? And that's what we see with Angeli here. She says, fellow humans. Now, fellow humans, it wouldn't necessarily be that memorable a line if she wasn't delivering a speech talking about AI. So this was a really nice twist on the trope, using something that's unfamiliar and presenting it in a novel way.
Train approaching. Please have ticket ready for inspection. She sounds so fake, doesn't she? And she doesn't even feel guilty that she's...
I love this. This rhetorical question and a joke at the same time. When you're doing this type of speech and you're speaking to a large audience, I believe there was 1,700 people who are physically watching this speech, never mind all the folks who are watching it online on the streaming platform as well. When you're speaking to that big an audience, working out how you're going to create that interaction with the audience can be tricky. Because you can't do okay, so question, shout out some answers. You can't have 1,000 people shouting out answers. You do things like hands up and stuff like that. But trying to find those different ways of bringing the audience into the speech. And one of my favorite ways to do this is the rhetorical question. And I actually do it all the time when I'm filming YouTube videos, for example. because it's one of the few ways that you can create that semblance of interaction back and forth. Because if I ask you a rhetorical question, it makes you think, doesn't it? You see, in that moment, it feels like I've just started talking to you right now. Of course, you know that I'm not speaking to just you right now. I'm speaking to everyone who is viewing this video, past, present, and future, right? But that's the power of a rhetorical question, is it can create that feeling of interaction even when the interaction actually isn't taking place. So this is a really powerful technique to use when you're speaking to a large audience or an audience who are not physically there with you. For example, all the folks who are watching this on the live stream, or you watching this video right now. It brings the audience in. And a rhetorical question that's also got that element of humor in it as well is really synergizing some techniques nicely.
And Lucia's voice trembled as she talked about her daughter going away to college. I could feel how much she loved her daughter. And Kareem's voice cracked as he talked about taking care of his mother who has cancer. I could feel his pain. And AJ talked about holding his son for the first time. I could feel his joy and love.
I could feel. Angeli uses the rule of three to build her argument here. She talks about these three different conversations, these three experiences that she's having with people, and using that repetitive phrase. Technically, it's an epistrophe. So an epistrophe is a statement that's repeated at the end of a series of successive clauses. Now, that sounds very technical when you describe it like that. The way that I always remember it is epistrophe, E for at the end. So it's just when you were repeating a phrase at the end of your points. I could feel. And what she's doing here with the rule of three is building up that emotional connection in this part of the story. As she's sharing these different human experiences, she's starting to help us connect with the human experience. And that's the theme of her talk, is about AI versus humanity. What's the difference? And here she builds that difference beautifully with this succession of shared experiences and using that epistrophe to hammer the points home.
I would never have felt this way if Sofia told their stories. And it made me think about
This was an interesting part of the speech. I think this is an unexpected laugh, because the way that Angeli delivers the point there, I don't think she's trying to deliver that as a point of humor. I think she's delivering that as a point of comparison, that, you know, if Sofia had said this, they wouldn't feel like that. But it actually gets a laugh from the audience. And what is so difficult to do when you're doing these speeches, you're so conscious of the time. You've worked on this speech so much, and you pretty much know it's going to finish at about the same time each time. You're usually within a 5-second window every time you perform it. By the time you get to the final version of the speech, you're expecting where people laugh, how long for, what parts you're pausing on, how long you're pausing for. And all of that time is very fine-tuned because you get disqualified if you go over time. And what can happen if there is something that upsets that timing in the speech? It can throw people off. But what I think Angeli does so well here, when she has that unexpected laugh, she doesn't panic and just try to go straight into her next line and go, oh, well, I have to say this line within 2 seconds of finishing that last one because otherwise I'm going to go over time. She allows that spontaneous audience reaction to happen. And that takes a lot of guts when you're up here and the time is tick, tick, ticking. But I think it also really feeds into the theme of her speech beautifully. She's talking about the importance of human connection. And in that moment, there was that opportunity for human connection. And if she had panicked and moved past it, she would have lost part of the essence of her speech. But instead, she allowed that moment to happen and it added to her speech. Now, of course, that is just speculation. To me, that appeared like an unexpected laugh. Now, I might be wrong. Maybe that is a line that's been laughed at before, and so Angeli wasn't really panicking about it. But it kind of looked to me like it was, and I think she handled it beautifully on stage.
Are there any voices in your life that you wish you could hear again? Voices that can't...
I love the wording of this question, because the question isn't presumptive. A lot of the time when you hear speakers ask a question of the audience, they're asking the question with the assumption that the audience relate to the question, or they have the answer. So something like, who here wants to be rich? Who here has experienced a challenge in their lives? And when you say a question like that, you're kind of implying that, of course, everyone in the audience wants to be rich. Of course, everyone in the audience has had a challenge in their life. And it's trying to sort of, it's almost creating a little bit of a false connection, because you're asking a question that is such a commonality. It's trying to force, oh, I feel affinity with this person because they want to be rich as well, or they've had a challenge in their life as well. What I like about this question is the way that it's worded. Are there any voices? It's not assuming the answer. Are there any voices? You know, maybe you don't in your life. But what I think is that most people will relate to that question. Are there voices you wish that you'd heard more? I think everyone will relate to it. And I like the way the question is worded, because it's not presuming that answer, but I do think it is uncovering that answer. So instead of saying something like, we've all lost voices in our life and that's what we have in common, it's allowing the audience to kind of come to that answer themselves and go, yeah, you know what? There are some voices in my life that I would have liked to have more. So I think it's a really clever wording of the question. It's uncovering the connection that's there rather than forcing the connection that's there.
The human voice is more than a tool for communication. It's a tool for connection. It's our emotions, our dreams, our stories. And when you speak, you're not just saying the words, you're sharing a piece of your soul. And if you listen closely, you can hear the heartbeat under the words.
I just let that clip run because it's fantastic writing. It's brilliantly crafted. That line of the human voice is not just a tool for communication, it's a tool for connection. Best line of the speech. And I actually think it was a potential speech title that could have been worked in a little bit more. Now, it didn't have to be, but that line, it's beautiful. And if you're trying to summarize 7 minutes of speaking, if you're trying to summarize hundreds of words of what am I actually trying to say here, and you can do it in one line like that, that is something that stands out to the audience. I love that line. It's the best line of the speech. The lines after as well of when you speak, you're not just saying the words, right? Because communication is more than just the content, it's the delivery as well. And don't we know that if you're a member of Toastmasters and you watch speeches, it's not just what the person says, it's how they deliver it as well. And then I loved how she came to the end of that of, you can hear the heartbeat underneath and that pause. It was so well executed. The writing was beautiful. The delivery of it was fantastic. And this is all coming in towards the end of the speech. So this is really coming to that crescendo, building to that final point, that call to action, that take-home message, and to have all of that lovely writing coming in right at the end of the speech, that's going to last with the audience. They're going to remember those parts that came at the end. So by far, the best part of the speech, I thought. The writing of this, it was beautifully crafted. It was wonderfully delivered. Really, really rating this. The speakers at the World Championship of Public Speaking have prepared their speeches so much, and they're delivering them in this high stakes environment. You get this one opportunity, this one chance to be on the stage and leave your mark on the judges. All speeches require this amount of preparation, and all speeches need to be performed at their best in those high stakes situations. And perhaps you have a speech that you're working on right now, something that you need to prepare, something that you need help and support with, and something that's, when you're on stage, is going to have some real world outcomes. You're trying to secure donations for a non-profit investment for a startup. You're trying to secure a new client or customer. You're trying to increase the brand and visibility of your business. Whatever those stakes might be, if you feel that you need a little bit more help and support in getting ready for that big stage, this is something that I can help you with. If you want to find out a little bit more about my coaching services and how I could help you with your speeches going forward, I've popped the link to my LinkedIn in the video description below. If you send me a message on there, give me a little bit of an idea of what you're working on right now, what your challenges are, and also what your aspirations are for your speech as well. We can look at some different coaching options for you and find the one that works best for you. Let's now look at what could potentially, possibly, have been improved with Angeli's speech at the World Championship of Public Speaking. In this video, I'm going to offer my ideas for improvement in a slightly different way to what I do on some of my other speech analysis videos. And this is just because I want to be sensitive to the people who I'm ultimately evaluating here. If you've watched my other speech evaluation videos, you know that I'm often looking at celebrities, politicians, world leaders. They are people who are on these big stages and have this big reputation, big personality. The people that we're looking at here, they're just everyday people. They're everyday members of this non-profit organization around the world. And so I want to be respectful and mindful of that when I'm looking at these ideas for improvement, and emphasis on these ideas for improvement. The second reason why I'm taking a little bit of a different approach is that when you get to this stage, you have worked on your speech so much. You've got to do 2 speeches in the semis and the finals. You can do them any way around that you like. And the one that's taken you here in particular is something that you've possibly worked on for 6, 9, 12 months. And then the second speech that you've got to do, you've worked on for at least 3 months when you found out you've got to this stage. But the really advanced competitors have probably been working on that speech even longer, knowing that they'll need a second speech. And when you've spent that much time on one speech and then you've delivered it, you're sick of it. You've spent so much time and energy on it, and you just want to take that step back and take that break from the speech. So with that in mind, when I'm offering ideas of what could have been changed and improved with these speeches, this is something that the speakers have been hearing so much for months and months and months on end. So I don't want to stack a big list of suggestions on top of, frankly, what they've already been hearing so much from their coaches and from their test audiences. And then the third reason that I'm approaching this a little bit differently is I am a fellow competitor in this contest. And also, I have not reached the world finals. So I want to be mindful of that and recognizing that all of these speakers have done an amazing job to get there. And frankly, they have gotten further than I have gotten. So for me to come in and start picking their speeches apart and nitpicking all these little things, I think is a little bit unfair and disrespectful of me. But what we do have in Toastmasters is we do have this culture of growth and learning. And that's the mentality that I want to go into these suggestions for improvement with. So with this in mind, I'm just going to focus on one idea for content and one idea for delivery. And this is actually what I would do in a regular Toastmasters evaluation. So for those of you who are familiar with Toastmasters evaluations, they're 2 to 3 minutes long. You don't have these big, long analysis videos like I do on this YouTube channel. You just got to pick up a couple things. And the way that I approach my evaluations is I go for one suggestion for content, one suggestion for delivery. And that's all that it ever is. It's only just a suggestion and an idea. When a speaker's looking for feedback, if you don't give them a suggestion or an idea, they can't do anything with it. If you do give them a suggestion or idea, they can either go, oh yeah, actually that makes sense, that's great, let me try and work that in or think about it. Or they can go, that for me and my style and this speech, it doesn't necessarily work. Appreciate the suggestion, but it's not something I'm going to take on. So that's the spirit that I'm going to look at with this feedback here for Angeli's speech. Got one idea for content, one idea for delivery. Let's have a look and see what ideas do you have from watching the speech as well.
Fired for being human, rehired for being human. What has this world come to? AI is everywhere. The train has left the station and it's moving fast. And I'm all for technology and innovation. AI has done some incredible things. But the human voice, wouldn't you agree, cannot be replaced by a machine. The human voice is more than a...
In terms of content for this speech, the thing that I loved about this speech is it's such a topical speech. AI in the last 12 months, 12 to 18 months, has become a huge talking point, and it's really clear that this is part of our future going forward. And at this point of the speech, Angeli acknowledges this. She says she's for technology and innovation. AI can do some wonderful things. But it was this very short segment of the speech, and then we kind of moved on to, but this is where AI is no good, and this is why humans are much more better, or they're more important. And I think I would like to have seen some more nuance in this. That one of the things that I've asked people when I'm talking to any kind of expert on AI, someone who knows more than me basically, is how do we maximize the positives of AI and how do we minimize the negatives? Because AI isn't this black and white issue. It's nuanced. There's some things that AI is going to be a threat to, and there's some things that AI is going to help us make the next leap forward in. And I would have liked to have seen that nuance in this speech a little bit more. I feel in this speech, AI is painted as the villain and humans are painted as the hero. And that's fine for the purposes of a speech. You need that kind of narrative quality to it. But I think to really help make this speech be even more topical, I would have just liked to have seen a little bit of more of that nuance come in about, well, AI might not be helpful for human connection, but maybe it can be used as a tool and a supplement. It can help us generate ideas or collect data that help us to connect better as humans. I would have liked to have seen that come in a little bit more. And there was a portion of this section just before. So if you've watched the speech in its entirety already, which I would have recommended that you do before watching this analysis, but I'm sure you have, the link to the full video is in the video description if not. So there's this little bit where she talks about how when Sofia replaced her job, they replaced her for all these reasons. It was a fraction of the cost, worked 24/7, spoke 19 languages, didn't have health insurance. And then she gets rehired, and as she's rehiring, she asks for all those same things again. And I think for me, I could remember that from last time. I didn't need to hear them again to remember it. And that was maybe a 10 to 15 second portion where if we hadn't gone through all of those benefits again, it would have just allowed a little bit more time for a little bit more nuance on this AI topic. Because I think it's so interesting, it's so relevant, it's so topical. I think it was fantastic for Angeli to have picked this topic to base her speech on. And I would have loved for her to take that time to delve just a little bit more into it and go a little bit more into the nuance of it rather than having this kind of hero and villain narrative. Have a villain with some virtues, still make it the villain, but show, okay, here are some extra things that we can think about in terms of AI.
Says to me, we're replacing your voice. What? You're being replaced by Sofia. She's available 24/7. She speaks 19 languages. She costs 1% of what we pay you, and she doesn't need health insurance. You're replacing me with a robot?
So that was the portion that I was just talking about in the content part, right? I think in terms of a delivery aspect for thinking about this speech, there are three characters in this speech. There's Angeli, there's her boss, and then there's Sofia, the AI. And I think for these dialogue portions, I didn't see enough of a distinction between the characters. As we're seeing that dialogue between Angeli and her boss, I'm kind of hearing Angeli's voice twice in that. And I think what Angeli could have done as a delivery aspect to make these characters stand out a little bit more is just adapt the voices slightly. Now, I'm not talking about being a trained actor and doing all these kind of different accents or doing anything that kind of sounds weird and kooky. But I think we could maybe we've got Angeli, she's got this kind of like quite sort of indignant tone throughout. She's been replaced by this robot. We could maybe have the boss who is speaking a little bit kind of deeper and in a bit more of like a clinical matter of fact way. Look, we have to replace you. It makes business sense. So you could have Angeli's kind of emotion coming out, and then you could have a bit more of the kind of business-like demeanor of the boss. And then, of course, you've got Sofia, the AI, and making that sound a bit more kind of machine-like and mechanical, something that's a bit more nasal. Hi, I'm Sofia, and I am not going to take over the world, I promise. You know, something like that. And I think having that distinction between the three characters' voices would have added more depth to these storytelling aspects, where we could start to imagine these different characters more, see their different personalities coming through in the speech a little bit more. So it doesn't have to be a huge distinction. When we're talking about dialogue and when we're talking about characters' voices, it's not about having this repertoire of different accents, different ages. You can do men, women, children, adults. You can do different countries. You can speak different languages, 19 languages. It's not about that in terms of the distinction. I think just a little bit more of the distinction in the dialogue would have made these characters pop even more in the speech. And that's all that I've got for Angeli's speech. I thought it was such a topical speech. I really enjoyed listening to it. And I really appreciated her having the courage to take this type of topic onto the stage. She didn't play with a safer topic, something that is maybe a little bit more trusted at the World Championship of Public Speaking. She took on something that's topical. She took on something that's relevant. She had this really nice angle on it. And just in terms of her and a speaker in general, I think she's got this really kind of natural, relaxed style. The way that she presents on stage, I kind of imagine that's how she talks when she's just having a conversation with someone. So I really like that style, I really like her demeanor, and I think her speech, it wasn't something that was very like formulaic. The things that she was doing and when she was doing them, like of course they were speaking techniques, like you're always going to use techniques when you're delivering a speech, but it didn't feel like, oh, now I need to ask a question to the audience, or now I need to present a common challenge. It didn't feel like it was like ticking the boxes of a speech. It just felt like it was this very smooth, natural story coming through. I really enjoyed watching this speech. And if this is anything to go by, it probably isn't going to be the last time we see Angeli on a stage at Toastmasters or a stage at the World Championship of Public Speaking.